Should we do the regular type of recording this week, or should we do the crazy recording?
We always do the crazy stuff.
Okay.
Welcome to another week on the D3 Datacast. Zach Snyder here, joined by Matt Snyder. And Matt, it feels like we did two things this weekend: drive and watch Division III basketball, all related to being at the 2025 Great Lakes Invitational in Washington, Pennsylvania, hosted by Washington Jefferson College, and a great event every year. This was no exception. Glad to see you made it home after dropping me off on your way. How are you doing? How are you feeling? You ready to push through a little bit more just to get this episode out, put a final bow on the 2025 Great Lakes Invitational?
No, I'm glad. I'm happy to talk about it because we had such a good time. Zach, I don't think you and I had ever visited a PAC school at all. To be able to visit Washington and Jefferson for this Great Lakes Invitational, I think was awesome. We've now been to 3 Great Lakes Invitationals at Wittenberg University, at Calvin University, and at Washington and Jefferson this week. All of them have been great. I think we had a particularly great experience this weekend at W&J, so happy to talk about the games this week, give a little bit of information on what we saw. But yeah, I'm still pumped. I love that much Division III basketball in 2 days, 8 games. That's a lot. We were in the gym a lot, but it was fantastic. We loved every minute of it.
It was, and we've talked in the last couple of weeks how it feels like getting all of these games at the start of the season here. It's like drinking from a fire hose. You don't know where to look, where to turn. There's too many games to watch. So it's kind of fun to be at an event like this and just be able to be dialed in a little bit onto what was going on right in front of us. Before we do dial in on that, let's zoom out a little bit. Hit this week's 4-point play where we cast a little bit of a wider view here. Let's start in the East, Matt. We're going to switch up our regionality here. What are you looking at in the East?
Yeah, team, I've been trying to keep my eye on this year is UMass Dartmouth. They're 4-2 right now. I think, outside of the top 25 mix or conversation, but they're starting to build a solid resume. They have a win over St. Joseph, Connecticut. They have a win over Babson. Those are 2 pretty good wins. They did lose to Bates on Sunday, and I think previously they had lost to WPI by 17. But I think the Corsairs are pretty good. They're a team that I'm now watching. Like I said, 2 pretty quality wins on their resume now. I think they're going to make a lot of noise in the Little East. They're a team, whenever I know they have a game, I'm looking for their spot on the d3hoops.com scoreboard. So UMass Dartmouth has my attention. Really looking forward to what they do this year.
And as we were talking about this, we're at that point where it's starting to make sense maybe to look at some teams that are, maybe they're 4-0, 5-0, kind of in that range. We're seeing a lot of really good teams take some losses, so it's kind of interesting to see some of those other spots pop up. Let's talk about Drew, Matt. Drew's one of those teams that has been unscathed so far, 5-0. They were one of those programs that was hit by some of the interesting, coaching carousel dominoes that fell. And, we'll see what happens down the line. But so far, you can't start better than 5-0 in your first 5 games. And so, certainly haven't been set back from last year's really successful 24-4 season. So good times for the Drew Rangers, and kind of interested to see how that looks going forward. All right, West, Matt. West.
Yeah, I'll
We're
take a
going
look
West.
at Region 9, and I'm going to go to UW Eau Claire for my West pick. They're a team I'm taking a little bit of a flyer on this week, Zach. That might be a little bit of a spoiler for a little bit later on in this episode. We might talk about UW Eau Claire again. They're, I believe, 6-0. They have wins over St. Norbert, Carleton, Cornell College, Concordia, Wisconsin, North Central Minnesota, and Simpson. I think the quality of competition there is admittedly not great. They're doing most of their work by beating those types of teams by big numbers, but they have me intrigued. I think they were the preseason WIAC number 4. I'm wondering, are they more like the WIAC number 2 or 3, and are they making top 25 type noise so far? I think big numbers against maybe second tier, what looks like maybe second tier type competition this year is necessary, but maybe insufficient for me to feel really, really great about them. But the Blue Golds, I think, have my attention right now. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued enough to consider myself a believer right now. So we'd like to see the quality of competition step up. Unfortunately, looking at their schedule a little bit, it might not come until WIAC play for them. But right now, they're getting my attention. UW Eau Claire, really want to see what's in store for them. And I think that they're kind of in that mix, kind of nationally as well right now.
I think it's shaping up where we're going to get into WIAC play and feel like we need to re-rack how we feel about the league
Every single
basically
week.
every
Yeah.
week. Yeah. All right, for the West, Matt, I'm going to talk about Whitworth. I admitted to feeling like I didn't really learn anything out of our West Coast schools in opening weekend. Well, I feel like we learned something this weekend about Whitworth. They made a trip to Minnesota where they completed a 2-0 trip with wins at Gustavus Adolphus and St. John's. Those are, two programs that have been and you typically expect to be around the top of the MIAC. So that's a good win for a Whitworth program that's looking for a little bit of a bounce back maybe from last year. I know the record looked good, but they were, a team that was ultimately looking for an at-large bid and wasn't able to get one for last year's tournament. So a good trip for Whitworth and something that we can finally maybe learn a little bit more. They had only played one game against Division III competition so far this season prior to that trip, and it was a win over Bethany. So great trip for Whitworth. Feels like now we know a lot more about the Pirates than we did previously.
Yeah, good call on that. Yeah.
North.
I wanted to make sure that in this episode we called out Wabash. I think they've off to a really good start. It's 3-0. The Little Giants have played 3 HCAC opponents so far. They've come away with 3 wins, pretty big wins. They beat Hanover by 29. They beat Rose-Hulman by 17. They beat Franklin by 18. I thought coming into kind of Sunday night's balloting top 25 process that I wasn't going to have enough teams that I really wanted to vote for. It kind of turned out the opposite. I had a lot of teams I did want to vote for. Maybe not of teams I felt good at 10, but kind of in that 15 to 25 range, I felt like I had 30 teams I kind of felt okay about in there. Unfortunately for me, I think Wabash is one of those teams right now that ended up on the cutting room floor, but are in that kind of really tight next group of teams. I mentioned those 3 HCAC teams that they've beaten. They get an opportunity against Wash U right away on Monday. So the night that this episode drops, they have a really big game. What can they do against a team in a really good conference in the UAA that also a lot of people think are like in the top half of that top 25 picture? So really good upcoming game for Wabash. Impressive so far. And then now looking forward to what they do while they turn that next page. I think we're going to see that right away next week.
Yeah, like to see that a team like that get that opportunity after kind of having earned the ability to kind of get in that mix for consideration, and it's like boom, you're kind of gonna know what the right decision is maybe right away. All right, for my North pick here, I'm gonna go with North Central Minnesota. Maybe not the North Central you're used to hearing about in Division III basketball all the time, but North Central Minnesota. They were one of my picks in our conference champion draft. Go back to episode 121 if you want to check out some of that fun contest we do with some of our D3 Hoops friends there. So I've been keeping an eye on North Central, and they've had an interesting start to the season, interesting schedule. They had their first 4 games all against MIAC opponents. The MIAC tends to cast a large shadow, maybe over some of those UMAC schools, just with the nature of kind of the profile of those two conferences. And while North Central got off to a 1-3 start against those schools, it was a 3-point loss at Bethel, 3 in double overtime against Hamlin, and then a 4-point loss to Carleton with a win against St. Mary's mixed in. So, it's like 4 games right there that they're right there with, teams that are going to be kind of in that, at least you'd think maybe kind of middle of the pack of the MIAC. Hamlin could even be challenging there in the MIAC. So I think it's 1-3. But for being my pick to win the UMAC, I feel like that's a very good showing, and it has me feeling very good about that pick.
Yeah.
They did kind of get punked by Eau Claire, but they bounced back with a win at Dominican. So again, as we get into UMAC play, I think this is a team that, despite what the record may say, very much looks like a UMAC contender or favorite.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're a UMAC and you can hang with that middle pack MIAC, then you feel pretty good, I think, usually.
Yep. All right. 1 point on the compass left to hit. Let's go south.
Yeah, let's talk about Rhodes, Zach. Rhodes has started the season 5-0. I think 4 of those games were against Division III opponents. They beat Hendricks, they beat Principia, they beat Blackburn, and East Texas Baptist. They're another team, though, that's going to get the opportunity to play a higher level of competition coming up next week. They're heading to St. Louis for games against Chicago and Wash U. I believe they call this the Scholars Classic, but I forgot to verify that. But 2 really big games. Wash U and Chicago, both in St. Louis. So Rhodes is starting to get some love ticking up in the computer ratings. Their scores have gone up after beating those 4 teams that I just named. But now, just like we said with Wabash, right? bang, Chicago and Wash U, two teams that have a lot of people have been voting in like their top 10 or 15 of the whole country. So Rhodes has two big opportunities. It might be a case where even if they, they'd love a win here. Even if they didn't, if they can play competitive games with both these teams, that's going to be enough to start putting them more and more on my radar as well. So love to see these teams start off, 4-0, 3-0, 5-0, and then get an opportunity, like we've been talking about, to play teams that we think are really good. Okay, what's this team made of? We're going to see it here. Another example of that is what we're going to see with Rhodes. I think it's next weekend. I think Saturday and Sunday they're playing this tournament in St. Louis. I believe Colorado College is the fourth team. So some good games here for those programs to get, and I'm looking forward to that as well.
Okay, I've got another undefeated team I want to use as my South team here, Matt. The only difference here with this undefeated team is they are 1-0 against Division Three
Let's
teams.
go.
But they happen, yes, yes, Concordia, Texas. Early season NPI can always be goofy, but it looks particularly weird with Concordia, Texas. The NPI number one having played exactly one game, but it was a really
Yeah,
good
it's a good
game. It was
win.
a really good result. It was a win at Hardin Simmons. So Matt, it's just one data point. Whether you're NPI or a top 25 voter or just a general fan trying to figure out, what exactly Concordia, Texas is going to be this year, can be this year. But I tell you what, it's a pretty good single data point. Looking forward to getting more data points on Concordia, Texas. Hey, winning at Hardin Simmons,
Yeah.
that's a preseason top 25 team. So going to be interesting to see if that is going to be something that looks more like the rule or more like the exception.
Yeah. And whether or not Hardin Simmons ends up being a top 25 team, like they're going to be a good team. So that win's like really good no matter what. So we kind of chuckle at the 1-0. Excuse the voice crack. We kind of chuckle at the 1-0, but it was a good win. So and a road win, I believe. So like really good
Yep.
to highlight that, Zach. Yeah.
Yep. All right, so as we mentioned, we did spend the weekend at the Great Lakes Invitational, and so that makes it a little bit easier for us to turn that into kind of the main topic of this episode. And we like to have a little fun with it instead of just talking about the teams, talking about the games. We put together our annual Great Lakes Invitational Power Rankings. We do it poll style, Matt. We are just two voters in this power rankings poll here, joined by the event creator Ryan Whitnable, Carl Barkley of D3 Direct, and Ryan Scott of D3Hoops.com. All five of us were in attendance, sitting there along the scorers table for courtside, watching all these games in person. So thanks to those three for joining us in putting together these power rankings. So that's how we're going through. The directions were kind of to rank these eight teams based on what we saw that weekend, right? So we're judging Mary Washington on how they played in this event, not considering, you know, uh, the previous game that Ryan Scott was also at, where he saw Mary Washington play Yeshiva in overtime, right? So kind of these are the Great Lakes Invitational Power Rankings. So we're ranking the teams as they performed at the event. So let's get right into it, starting number 8 in our power rankings, Matt. That was Case Western Reserve. They had a loss at Washington and Jefferson, the hosts, 70-69 on Friday night. Came back Saturday, another loss to Trinity, Texas, 75-59. Do want to shout out Alex Vincent, the all invitational team member from Case Western Reserve. Each team had a player honored as part of the all invitational team. Alex Vincent gets the nod for the Spartans.
Yeah, I think one thing that stands out about Case is they've got a couple of good and big bigs, and they also have some really good guards. The first game against W&J, that was a really close game that was kind of back and forth for all 40 minutes. A really big rebounding advantage in that one for Case, and that kept them in the game on what was kind of a tough shooting night. W&J defense made it tough on Case, but the rebounding advantage was massive there. And that kept, they just couldn't get enough looks really when push came to shove, and make every shot count in what ended up being kind of like a one possession game. And so that they ultimately fell in defeat in what was a really entertaining game. The next night against Trinity was a little bit of a different story for them. Trinity's defense, what we saw was really stifling, and the rebounding advantage was a little bit neutralized in that one. But it was also a tough shooting night. And look, we're ranking Case 8 here at the GLI. They got 2 losses. I don't think that means that Case is a bad team by any stretch of the imagination. I was looking at our D3 Datacast, or we were talking about this in the car ride. They're number 118 in the efficiency ratings in the country. That's pretty close to being a top 25% team, close to an upper quartile team in the division. Unfortunately for them, at an event like the Great Lakes Invitational, where everyone's good, that means you might lose 2 games. And then when you go on to play in the UAA, that's also going to be kind of tough. And they're, being even number 118 overall, that's probably going to be one of the lower rated teams in the UAA. So going to be tough for Case. Even though they're a good team, their record might not end up showing their full potential, just because tough conference, tough schedule, things might not end up going their way the entire season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's an 0-2 weekend for Case. Matt, for head coach Todd McGinnis, it might feel like an 0-3 weekend because he also lost sibling bragging rights to his brother, who happens to be the AD at Washington and Jefferson. So shout out to Scott McGinnis. They were great hosts all weekend, great hospitality. But yeah, a little added intrigue with that sibling connection there. Matt, also, just you talked about that first half against Trinity. Case just 17 points at the half. I think we got the note there at halftime from Ryan Whitnable, who keeps a lot of tournament history information there. It was the lowest scoring half, I think, for any team in GLI history. So yeah, it was a rough start. But I tell you what's going to serve them well. You talk about where they fit in the overall scheme of things in terms of Division III basketball, and it just happens that this is a great field, and they also are going to be having to get into what is a great conference. But for as rough as that first half was scoring the basketball for them and how big of a margin it was, that team really played hard throughout that second half. Really, credit to the program, credit to those kids. They absolutely battled. They were not giving in to anything, in what was a very difficult game for them against Trinity.
And they did turn around and score 42 points in the second half. It's just that they had dug themselves a big hole and couldn't really climb all the way out of it.
Absolutely. Okay, number 7 goes to the Carthage Firebirds. They lost Friday night against Maryville, 78-66. And then Saturday was another loss to Mary Washington, 68-57. Ryan Johnson, the all-invitational team member from Carthage.
Yeah, Carthage ended up playing 2 really tough opponents here. At the end of the season, these losses probably aren't going to look overall very terrible. If Maryville we think is pretty good, Mary Washington could be really, really good. But I'll be honest, my expectation coming into this tournament was Carthage is going to have the opportunity to get these 2 games, and I think Carthage is going to win them, and then that means that they're kind of a surefire top 5 team. That wasn't what we saw. They lost both these games by double digits, and I think just in watching them, the thing that stuck out to me at least was they didn't really seem to match the intensity that other teams were putting out on the court. It seems like play got dictated to them in both of their games more than they were able to dictate. They have still have impressive players. I think they can put it all together. I think it's not there now. I don't want to say that the effort level was low. I don't want to question anyone's effort level, but it seems like at times the intensity wasn't quite there. And I know players don't want to play selfishly, but I wonder if someone like an Antoine Nesbitt or a Ryan Johnson are deferring a little bit too much to teammates and being maybe too unselfish and sharing the ball too much when, it's a roster full of, I think, skilled players. But down the stretch, let's say in that Mary Washington game, Ryan Johnson did force the issue a few times and get like a few buckets in a row. And I just wondered if maybe some of that should happen earlier in the game or more frequently in the game just to establish the presence. And then maybe that opens up other things. I don't know. But it was a little bit of a surprise. I think, again, tournament full of great teams. Someone's probably going to come out with 2 losses. It was Carthage here. I think we expected to see really big things from them, and we ended up seeing pretty big things out of their opponents in these games instead.
Yeah, that Maryville game, it was a 21-point lead for Maryville, with just under 16 minutes to go. But Carthage really sparked something after that, and it felt like it was just a couple minutes later it was down to single digits. Very much made it a game. It's unfortunate that it seemed like that spark was confined to that. That point, and it didn't really get closer after that. I think one of the big takeaways for me was just how much all of these games were really framed by and kind of defined by which team was the aggressor, which team was able to dictate how that game was going to go, and it always seemed like it was whoever Carthage was playing that day. I thought for sure during that first half, Maryville was that way. Mary Washington was that way. It just seemed like, uh, in those two matchups, it was the other team that was always a little bit more active than
Yeah.
Carthage was in those matchups.
Yeah, I think activity is a good way to say it.
Yeah. Okay, number 6, Matt, we have the Marietta Pioneers. They had an overtime loss to Trinity 86-81 on Friday, followed that up with a 86-55 loss to Trine. Elijah Harden was the all-invitational team member there. He was very important in that I think a bucket in forcing that
Yeah.
overtime, and then I think led off that overtime with a three. But unfortunately, they were not able to come out with a win there. But Elijah Harden, well deserved honor for him as the All Invitational team member from Marietta.
Yeah, he was an impressive player and playmaker. I think all weekend for Marietta, and particularly in that Trinity game, I think he was great. Scored in a ton of points. But I think unfortunately for Marietta, like the halftime against Trinity ended up being the high water mark of the weekend. I think they were up 19 in the first half, and for me, even being up 19, I think the pivotal few minute stretch. I don't know the exact time, but it felt like the last 2 minutes or so that lead got cut from 19 to 14 where it was at halftime, and that maybe Trinity's tough, so they're going to cause other teams to make mistakes. They were down big. They were trying to put pressure on Marietta. It did seem like at the end maybe they got a little bit lax. They lost focus. They were up big, and they allowed Trinity to cut into that lead just a little bit in a game that every point ended up mattering. I think that maybe allowed Trinity to get a little bit of momentum into the locker room, and then the second half was a different story, forcing the overtime, and then ultimately Marietta was not able to win in overtime. And I think even though they were up so big and still up big at halftime, that ended up being a really big moment in the game as far as I saw. And then, that Trine game is one that we had highlighted ever since kind of the news hit that John Vanderwall was taking the head coaching job at Trine, leaving Marietta, that this game was on the schedule early in the season. It did end up being an intense, emotional game. You could tell both sides wanted to win the game, of course, but also there was a little bit extra built into this. Ultimately, it was Trine who could execute, and Marietta wasn't able to maybe run the type of stuff they wanted to or get the types of looks they wanted to against Trine, and it just kind of kept slipping away further and further and further. It feels, I think, 31. If they played again, it's not going to be a 31-point game. I would still predict a close game between Marietta and Trine. It just on this day. Trine was able to get the looks and convert on the looks they wanted to, and Marietta was ultimately a team that ended up feeling a little bit more frustrated than able to execute.
And it was a really nice crowd for a neutral court
Yeah,
game on Saturday there. Most of them were wearing Marietta gear and unfortunately didn't have a lot to cheer for on the day, Matt, but it was a hard-fought battle, an emotional contest as we expected. A really physical game that unfortunately was marred by just
yeah,
a ton of foul calls that didn't probably even need to be made. 49 total fouls, and you look at the final margin, right? So that's not even a number inflated by an end of game situation where someone's just fouling to try to extend the game. But obviously Trine was able to kind of play through that, find something to get going, despite the fact that that game really had no flow to it because it
yeah.
seemed like there was a whistle every other minute. Um, so just yeah, kind of a rough day there for the Pioneers. Number 5 in our Great Lakes Invitational Power Rankings, Matt, the Maryville Scots. They had a very nice performance in a win against Carthage on Friday night, 78-66. Followed it up with a loss against the host Washington Jefferson, 79-75 Saturday night. Chase Morgan gets the nod as the all-invitational team member there from the Scots.
Zach, now I don't know if you have this written down. Did Carthage jump out to a 9-2 lead? Was that what it was? I don't know if we have that score, but I think Carthage jumped out to a lead, and
Yeah, I don't have that specific
okay,
note written down, but that sounds about right from what I remember. Yeah, I think it was early. Carthage got a few buckets, and then Maryville really settled in, and they were able to really lock down Carthage
yeah,
defensively, especially that first half. And I was able to join the stream halftime show of this game, and I made the comment on there that I think of, probably rightly so, Maryville as an offensive team, right? They're a,
mhm,
they're a team that gets by because they're really good offensively, more so than on their defense. But I thought they really locked down Carthage. And it goes back to the earlier comment, like the week was really defined by which team was going to set the tone, be able to, maybe bring just a little bit more energy. That was definitely Maryville through that first half. And you know, again, amazingly, it was sort of their defense that
Yeah.
set that tone. And because I don't think of them that way. Maybe that's something Carthage wasn't really expecting, and so they get into this matchup, and suddenly the defense is a little bit tighter. Maybe they thought they'd be able a little bit more freedom to operate. And Maryville just did a really nice job making it very difficult for that Carthage offense to operate after that first couple minutes where they did have a little bit of a lead, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and it was Carthage started. They moved the ball. They got open looks. They knocked down big shots. I think really took the first swing at Maryville. They took a timeout. I think just a 30. They regrouped. And then I think from there on out, the defensive intensity really ratcheted up. And then from there, they were the ones, I think, as you mentioned before, they were the ones that were able to really dictate how the game flowed, how it was played. They weren't afraid of being physical. They weren't afraid of mixing it up. They were playing with high energy. And it was really impressive. And I think you're right. I think I was really impressed at what they were able to do defensively. Carthage has some impressively physical players, or players that look big and strong and everything. And even if they outsized Maryville, not that Maryville's got little players necessarily in the post, but they weren't afraid to go toe to toe for them. Even when Carthage started to make a little bit of a run, Maryville then didn't blink. They made big shots of their own, and that was a really impressive win. That was. I was questioning like, are they top 25 or not? And that was one that's like, I think that they're as good as we kind of thought that they were going to be. Whether that ultimately is top 24 or not, depending on how the landscape shifts, I don't think that there's any reason to doubt what Maryville can bring this season.
Mhm. And then I felt like the script was flipped a little bit in that loss to Washington and Jefferson, where it was the presidents who
Yeah.
defensively really put the pressure and made it difficult for Maryville to operate. It's interesting because even sitting here now thinking about it, if Maryville and Carthage play a 7 game series, do I think that Maryville is the favorite in that 7 game series? I don't know. Maybe not. Same thing. Like if Maryville and W&J play a 7 game series, W&J was very impressive, won the game. But do I think that necessarily they might be the favorite in that matchup in a 7 game series? Again,
I don't know.
maybe not, right? But that's not what it is. It's a single game situation. Maryville kind of really took it to Carthage, and then the next night, Washington and Jefferson really took it to Maryville.
Yeah. And two different styles that they had to face. Washington
Yep.
and Jefferson pressed and pressured the ball. Maryville never really felt comfortable even getting the ball in sometimes after a made basket. Obviously, you don't want the opponent to make a basket, but it was doubly important in this game against Maryville because if you allowed the defense to set up, they had trouble several times even just getting the ball in and not allowing W&J to steal and convert into a layup. So completely different, two different styles, and that's what you get at a tournament like this, where a team from the South comes in and plays a team from Wisconsin and a team from Pennsylvania. I think you get some of that mix of styles, and I think here Maryville was a little bit on the back foot, but they still had opportunities. This game was really really close down the stretch. Came down to a couple of shots either way, but it was a fun game. It was a close game that you felt like both teams ended up executing at a pretty high level at the end. Not that everyone was making mistakes and just seeing who was the last team that could make a mistake, right? It was the opposite of that. It was play after play being made by the players, and that was fun to see.
Absolutely. Let's go on to number 4, Matt. The Trine Thunder. They lost Friday to Mary Washington 72-57, bounced back with that win against Marietta that we've already talked about. On the Marietta slide, 86-55. All Invitational team member is Jaden Bradshaw, who now becomes a 2-time All GLI member from 2 different teams. He, of course, was a member of Marietta, made the move to Trine along with John Vanderwall. So he has the distinction of being an All GLI player for both Marietta and Trine now.
Yeah, the Mary Washington game, that was the first game of the entire tournament weekend. Really, it was a pretty close game, back and forth game, especially for the first half. Mary Washington was able to pull away in that second half. I think Trine will take a 1-1 here, especially with what we think we know about Mary Washington coming out of that tournament. That's not going to be a terrible looking loss to get the win over Marietta. I think that's going to be a comfortable weekend for Trine, and I think they come out looking pretty good, right? You always want to win both, but at an event like this, when everyone's good, if you can at least show that you belong and get one of those wins and play relatively competitively in the other game. I think Trine showed themselves to be probably a team that can be a legit contender in the MIAA with teams like Calvin and Hope and Olivet and whoever else is going to be in the mix at the top of the conference. I think we expected Trine to be there. But really impressive what they were able to do with Marietta. I think their entire team was locked in. I think their bench was engaged. They seemed to communicate well with each other. And one thing that was interesting to hear from Trine at the post-game press conference after their win versus Marietta is John Vanderwall say, it feels like we almost have 5 teams here, right? It's the players that came with me from Marietta, the players we were recruiting from Marietta, the players that were here from Trine, the players that were being recruited from Trine, and then maybe a few other transfers sprinkled in. So they're trying to fit the pieces together. It's still November. Players are having to unlearn a Brooks Miller system and maybe relearn a John Vanderwall system. So I think the Trine Thunder are a team who could continue to find themselves as the season goes on and continue to click as the months and weeks pass.
Yeah, I felt like Friday, it seemed like very much like a team that John Vanderwall was trying to still like get to do what he wanted them to do, to understand what he wanted them to do. But then just a day later, it
Yeah.
feels like a
They do
bunch
those
was
things.
clicking
Yeah.
it was clicking all of a sudden, right? So, it's a work in progress. It's probably going to be uneven, kind of a day by day thing. But definitely Saturday kind of maybe gave a glimpse of, what that team can look like maybe when they're operating a little bit more consistently later on this season. All right, number 3, Matt, we're going to go here with the hosts, Washington Jefferson Presidents. They got the win as the hosts on Friday against Case Western Reserve 70-69, and then defeated Maryville 79-75 in really what was an outstanding way to cap off a great event, the final game of the event, and really maybe one of the most exciting games of the weekend.
Yeah. And
Just real quick, sorry, just to shout out our all invitational team member from WJ, Matthew Cart, who made some, just some huge baskets in that Maryville game, especially.
Yeah, and he made the shot that if it wasn't directly the shot that sealed it, at least felt like at the time that it put them up in a big spot. I think probably the team that played the 2 most entertaining games ended up being host Washington and Jefferson, which is cool. At the end of the night, you get probably the biggest crowds and the most energy in the building because it's the home team that's playing there, and they looked good. And to be honest, the President's Athletic Conference tends to be or be treated as a second-tier conference. They showed up against a UAA opponent and a top 25 opponent on their home court, and they defended home court, and they won, and they did it with impressive defense. Their pressure defense makes other teams uncomfortable all the time. They force their opponents into difficult looks in the half court as well. And it felt like, in that Maryville game, after what they did against Carthage the first night, we kind of expected them to come and eventually start again dictating things back to Washington Jefferson, and that really didn't happen. The game did get close. They actually W&J ran out to I think a pretty big lead in that game, and Maryville chipped it back. But Washington Jefferson never backed down, even when Maryville took a lead later. It was back and forth. They continued to execute and hit big shots. We were looking at defensive efficiency ratings coming out of this tournament, and W&J was like a top. I think they were number 9 on the defensive efficiency ratings, and we saw that on display here. They made it difficult. I think I mentioned it on the Maryville slide. They could hardly get the ball up the court. It was something like I should be quoting numbers off the top of my head, but like 24 points off of turnovers in this game, and it wasn't just the number of turnovers. It was that they cashed them into buckets with a really high frequency. So when Maryville made a mistake, Washington Jefferson got the ball in a position then to turn it into points, and they did that so often. It just made things so tough. I think they're a pretty legit good team. I think they're going to be dangerous in the President's Athletic Conference. Obviously, we saw them up close. It's really easy to see the team that you just saw win 2 impressive games and say they're obviously going to be the best team in their conference. But I really think that they are now one of the favorites in that conference. A team like St. Vincent, other teams are good in that league that can challenge them. But Washington and Jefferson has been building momentum for a few seasons now, and it feels like this could be a year it all comes together. Again, a tournament like Great Lakes Invitational, talk about it a lot, how there's usually 8, 6, 7, 8 tournament caliber teams. Washington and Jefferson looked every bit that part with everyone else that was on the floor.
Hmm. Yeah, I think if you look at the box score of that game, the turnover numbers maybe don't look crazy or don't look that different, but the nature of those tournaments or those turnovers felt completely different in the game. Oftentimes, it was W&J forcing a turnover in the backcourt that they were able to convert into points. And that was certainly how they really blitzed Maryville to start the game. Um, and it just kind of snowballs, right? It's like they turn you over and get a bucket, which lets them set up that pressure defense. And sometimes you're just like turn it over again, and they get an easy bucket, which lets them set it up again, right? And especially in that game, even if it was in the half court, they make a shot that gives them the chance to set up, uh, that full court pressure. So, maybe that's just kind of what it looks like for W&J when everything is going right or everything is going their way. And some nights it's not going to do that, obviously. But yeah, for a Maryville team that really dictated play, dictated how that game was going to be played with Carthage for W&J to turn around and be able to do that to Maryville, I think was
Yeah.
really impressive. And yeah, you can't say more about really their performance in that game.
Yeah. 79-75 was the final score of that game.
Yep. Okay, number two, Matt, two teams left here. Let's go with the Trinity Tigers. Uh, the 86-81 overtime win over Marietta on Friday, and the 75-59 win over Case Western Reserve on Saturday. Dylan Walker had an especially big game against Marietta, all invitational team member there for the Tigers.
Yeah, and as we had mentioned earlier, getting down big against Marietta in the first half, I was really impressed that Trinity didn't show any quit. They came out of the locker room and they continued to play their game. They put pressure on Marietta. They turned them over several times, but they just played possession after possession after possession, forced that game into overtime, and then continued to play their brand of basketball and got a win. I think, and then the next night against Case Western Reserve, kind of put that game away in the first 20 minutes with just, I don't think Case got a comfortable look for most of that game, much less the first half. I think they shot under 35% for the entire game. But Trinity was really impressive. I think you used the term activity early on. They pressure the ball more in the half court than full court press. They'll pressure the ball, but they are getting their hands into passing lanes all the time. If you make a pass that's at all lazy, or a lollipop it at all, they're going to tip the ball, they're going to intercept the ball, they're going to tip it to their teammate, then they're going to start a fast break the other way. We saw that time and again. And they just wear on you for 40 minutes. It's hard for players to stay focused and in tune for that period of time. But credit for Trinity to keep up the defensive intensity, doing that up and down the court night after night, on a back-to-back even, and putting up impressive defensive stats. They're another team that I was really impressed with, and I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the year if they rank as one of the better defensive teams in all of Division III.
Hmm. Yeah, we get to that first stoppage of play, and the first note I wrote, and I think I turned to you and said it, is just, Trinity looks like Trinity,
Yeah.
which maybe isn't saying a lot, but of course, this is another program that went through a coaching change. Marwan Orakabawi takes over for Trinity, and so I think it was a good thing to be able to say, hey, Trinity looks like Trinity, right? They
Yeah.
don't suddenly look a lot different. Um, they're doing some of the things that you kind of expect those Trinity teams to do, and they were doing it well. And then it was interesting to hear in some of the post game comments where Coach Rock is acknowledging that there was a great foundation here in
Yeah.
place when he got here, right? So he's very much trying to add to it, but to not change or completely go away from what was working with for the program for some of those guys who have been there just because maybe he's new to the program.
Yeah.
And I think that that's very much what we saw, right? We didn't see a team that looked like they're suddenly trying to play some different style. So I think that's great. I think that's what a really good coach does, is try to take what the players do well, what they know, and then bring his own experience into that. So I think it's a very encouraging weekend for a program under a new coach, and just to be able to say Trinity looks like Trinity, I think is great news. And really looking forward to see kind of how that develops over the course of the year.
And they played a lot of players. I think in both games, rotated deep into the bench. Not all of them got a ton of minutes, but it's cool to see that many guys hit the floor. And I think all of them played with a lot of cohesion. They definitely played team basketball together, and I think that was fun to see as well.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Let's go on, Matt. One more here to talk about number one in our power rankings as voted by our 5 voter panel. Mary Washington, the Eagles. They got the 72-57 win over Trine on Friday, 68-57 win over Carthage. All invitational team member here, Matt, was Kai Robinson, who also was named the most outstanding player of the Great Lakes Invitational this year.
Yeah, 2 impressive wins, 2 double-digit wins for Mary Washington against good teams. Carthage was a preseason top 25 team. Trine is a program that we just saw win a national championship a couple years ago. Not very many of those players are left, but at least one is. And Mary Washington was impressive in both games. I think, we just talked about how Trinity plays together as a team. I think that the program that exemplified that the most this weekend, though, is Mary Washington. Everyone on the floor seems like they're playing with the same mission in mind, and really highlighted in that Carthage game. They weren't the bigger team, but they out-rebounded Carthage. They made up for whatever they lacked in size with some combination of smarts and athleticism, and just a kind of a desire to play together. And we sat nearer to their bench, so we heard kind of them talking together. But the coaching staff, the assistant coaches, and the other players were really encouraging them to move the ball, look for the extra pass, find the open shooter. And they did that really well. They do that like a senior-laden team, and it's kind of a team with a lot of sophomores and juniors even on it. It's not that old of a team. It's pretty young, and they play really well. They play pretty disciplined. I think they're rolling. We saw some results or scores that rolled through earlier in the season, which were wins, but maybe closer wins than we thought that they were. But this team looked really good this weekend. I think one of their starters, was it Burgess, was playing his first 2 games this weekend, so he was added a great dynamic for them as well. I think Mary Washington looked every bit like a top 10, 12 team in the country. They played really well. And Kai Robinson, their all invitational team member, I think he was named most outstanding player as well. He was terrific, fantastic. I think he's just a sophomore, really, really good player, really smart player, can kind of score inside and outside, plays with toughness, and was really, really a treat to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a young team, but I'll tell you what, watching them, you would never know it. They seem very steady, don't get too high, don't get too low. In that win over Carthage, just 5 turnovers, right? So something that you might think that you're going to see out of a young team is a bunch of turnovers. No, they take care of the ball. Kai Robinson played 39 and a half minutes on Friday, follows that up, comes back Saturday, has a game high 27 points on just 15 shots, right? So they're young, but they don't show it because they're not forcing shots. They always seem to be under control, just very much kind of in control of what they're doing, what they want to do, operating as a team. And, it's not that I came into the season with any particular concerns about Mary Washington, but I think we've seen from other teams in the past that have made a late season run or, a tournament run, and then bring back a lot of the same pieces, is that's not necessarily a guarantee to be a springboard into, continuing what that run looked like through the next season, right? That's just not guaranteed. But I think Mary Washington, with this kind of weekend, shows that anyone who wanted to put stock in what they could be this year based on that run was right in doing so.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, any other final thoughts as we just wrap up Great Lakes Invitational weekend? I can't say enough about W&J, everyone there. Just, great hospitality, great hosts, great basketball out of the host team as well. And Ryan Whitnable does a great job.
Yeah.
He's always trying to get the best possible field, and it just even felt like we got the right matchups out of this week, the weekend too.
Yeah, just when you see 8 teams come together for 4 games each day, I think you're right. We didn't leave saying, oh, we wished we could have seen X team play Y team instead of this. We really mostly saw all the teams we wanted to see play each other this weekend. Especially day one, we were all talking at the media table, and then afterwards, it's hard to predict the matchups when you're making them in March for the next season and who's going to be back and who's not and whatnot. But I think Ryan nailed the matchups all along. The teams that needed a chance to prove something got that opportunity and took advantage of it. Wasn't like there was any big mismatches. Even though we saw some lopsided scores, they were still intense games and games that we expected to be competitive, that one team just took advantage of the opportunity. So a really great weekend. And yeah, I can't say enough about the Washington and Jefferson facilities, the staff, the people. Everyone was really friendly. Everyone was really accommodating. Everyone was just really supportive of their program and of Division III basketball. I think I saw a lot of institutional pride just in even the way the facilities are maintained and laid out. I think on one of the lower levels and the upper levels had trophy cases of historical W&J memorabilia. Just a lot of pride, both for their school and I think for the entire Division III level, and that was cool to see. I think it was kind of a YD3 weekend, which Great Lakes Invitational always is. So shouts to the W&J folks. Can't say enough about them.
So we had the D3Hoops.com preseason top 25, but now we've had a few weeks of play and we haven't had an update to that. So that, has been irrelevant basically for a couple weeks now. We're finally going to get our first in-season top 25 poll this week, which means, last week we had you do a mock ballot. You got to do a real ballot this time. We've seen a lot of games on stream, some great teams, some great games in person this weekend. So where are you at in putting together the first in-season ballot for the top 25?
Yeah, it turns out my mock ballot wasn't any good. I had a big shakeup since then. So here's the ballot, though. Here's Monday's ballot. There's going to be a new poll released from D3Hoops.com. This is mine. Trinity, Connecticut stays number 1, no changes. A team I've been really impressed with now that has a good win, is undefeated. Illinois Wesleyan, they beat U Chicago. They won their kind of home tournament with Illinois College and UW Oshkosh. They really shellacked a few teams down in Michigan this week. So Illinois Wesleyan is actually jumping all the way up to number 2 for me. Randolph-Macon kind of stays in the mix at number 3. UW La Crosse has been impressive. They're at 4. Redlands is number 5. And Chicago, even with that close loss at Illinois Wesleyan, if I think Illinois Wesleyan's as good as I think they are, then Chicago's loss to them isn't that bad, and they can still kind of be a top 10 team. So I'm putting them at 6. Washington University at number 7. Mary Washington, who we just saw in the Great Lakes Invitational, at number 8. So that's a few spots up on my ballot for them. Hampton-Sydney, they were impressive, particularly in the opening weekend when they went toe-to-toe with a team like UW La Crosse on a neutral court. I think they've been good. And then we get to kind of some teams that have some question marks for me. Emory lost a big game to Trinity, Texas, but now that doesn't look so bad after we saw Trinity play a really good weekend. So I think that that's one that we're going to write off as you played a good team and you lost, so maybe that's okay. Wesleyan, they had a good win against Roanoke this past weekend, so they're still kind of in a similar range, I think up a few spots for me. I'm holding firm with Calvin at number 12. Roanoke does stay in the mix for me at number 13, despite that loss to Wesleyan. I think that was a really close game that Roanoke led for a lot of the way. Wesleyan was ultimately victorious, but not one that I think I want to ding Roanoke for too much. Virginia Wesleyan is now a team that I think we've not seen play in a week. I think they had a little bit of a break here. Their loss, though, was opening weekend to UW. Is that who they lost to? Did they lose to UW La Crosse? I actually have my ballot right in front of me. Let's just make sure I'm saying the right words here. They lost to UW La Crosse by 3. That was on their home court, but still, I think that looks like a pretty decent result, a competitive result. I highlighted this in my mock ballot last week, but I think I'm actually pretty high on NYU now. 15 might be too high, but we're starting to get into the zone of maybe there's not a lot of gap between number 15 and 25 here. So there's a lot of teams that are in this mix and maybe 10 additional teams in this mix that are not shown here. So NYU for me is one of those teams. Hood has some impressive games to their credit now. They are, I think, 6-0. They've beaten teams like Catholic. They've beaten, Ramapo, McDaniel, Marymount, St. Vincent. So good to see from Hood. See if they can keep that rolling. Tufts, I do not know what to make of Tufts. They were a preseason number 4 team for me, something like that. Yeah, it was number 4. They lost their first 2 games, Babson and Endicott, both close competitive games on the road. Then they go on to beat Suffolk and Emerson. Emerson was by a big score. And then on Sunday, they beat Yeshiva, but it was in overtime. They won by 6. I still expect that Tufts will be good. I don't know that I'm super convinced 100% locked in that they're number 17 good right now, but I think they can be, and I think they will be. So I'm giving them a lot of latitude right now. I realize that, but for now I'm sticking with Tufts at number 17. Catholic is number 18. They were kind of around, they think they were 15 on my preseason ballot, so they moved down a few spots. Their only loss is to Hood in overtime, which I now have a couple of spots ahead of them. Mount Union enters the picture for me at number 19. I think they've been good so far. That's a team that I'm hoping to maybe attend a game in their gym later on in the season and see them up close and in person. Drew, I think 5-0. They enter my ballot at number 20, team that you highlighted earlier in this episode in the 4-point play. TCNJ in up a few spots for me from the preseason ballot at number 21. Their only loss right now is to Drew. Otherwise, they have 4 wins and that 1 loss. They've also beaten Wesleyan in overtime, and Wesleyan was a team that I have in my top 25. So, TCNJ I think has shown that they can play with these types of teams. Trinity we saw at the GLI. We talked a lot about them this episode. They've been very impressive. They did have that win against Emory, and then their blemish is I think it was a 30-point loss to Chicago. If Chicago's number 6, 30 points doesn't look great. That was a bad loss, but they had just beaten Emory. We've seen them now beat Marietta and Case. They also beat Mary Hardin Baylor. Those are all name brand opponents. At least we'll see how good each of them are this year. But I think Trinity is good, and I'm happy to rank them here at number 22. York, Pennsylvania is undefeated. They're 5-0. They've beaten teams such as Hobart and Johns Hopkins. So I think York looks good for me. I don't quite know. Are they 23 or are they 30? But to be honest, I don't think there's a lot of separation between those types of teams. So glad for York here to be at number 23. And then Endicott. Endicott, I was locked in. They did lose to Colby on Saturday on the road by 4. So I wavered slightly, but I'm like, no, they've beaten Tufts. They've beaten MIT. They've beaten Nichols. I think Endicott is good. Kept them in, maybe not as high as they would have been if they had beaten Colby, but still solid there at number 24. And then the team I talked about, I was taking a flyer on. I hinted at this. UW Eau Claire at number 25. They are undefeated, 6-0. I don't know that you can really say they've played anyone yet, but they're putting up really good numbers. The computer is starting to like them, and I like computers, so I'm happy to roll with UW Eau Claire at least for now.
So here's the trick, Matt, with the first in-season ballot is how much how much do you want to come off your priors or your expectations for what you think teams are or could be, and reacting to those wins and losses. I mean, you've made a few references to kind of within expectation or within kind of reasonable result, win or loss, and so is that kind of the barometer you're trying to use in terms of, am I really thinking about this team differently today than I did, a few weeks ago for that preseason ballot?
Yeah, it's more of what was my preseason expectation and how has each result as a single data point compared to my preseason expectation. So if you play another tough team and you play them on the road and you lose a close game, to me, that doesn't really shift what I thought about you too much, at least to the negative, because if you played a team kind of in or around the rankings, you played them close, and we expected that to be a basket either way, and maybe you lose it by a basket, especially for now, that's okay. A team like Tufts, let's say, who's maybe done that 2 times, maybe almost 3 times, it starts to get a little dicey, to use a word of the weekend that we had. You don't want to see those stack up too much. But for me, even with Tufts, have we shifted too much? None of those games were that awful. You just don't want to have your entire resume be, well, it wasn't that awful. So I am giving them a little bit of latitude, but it's really what was my expectation, how much has that shifted, how have each result shifted from that, and how comfortable I am with you in any particular position. And then I want to go back and say, I kind of think 1 will beat 2, will beat 3, will beat 4. And as long as I'm comfortable with that order, then I'm kind of good with it.
Mm-hmm. And you pointed out, and we've seen some interesting head-to-heads kind of within this. You mentioned the Wesleyan Roanoke head-to-head this weekend. Earlier this week, or this past week, Chicago at Illinois Wesleyan. And again, if those are 2 top teams, you're playing a road game, kind of a single possession, had a shot to tie the game at the buzzer. That seems very much like kind of what you would expect for a number 6 at a number 2, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Okay. I think as we looked at the mock ballot last week, Endicott was maybe one of those big ones to highlight. I think maybe you had them 16-ish a week ago, and then as you mentioned, they did take that loss. So here they're still in at 24. Um, but a good one to watch. Eau Claire at 25. Matt, I feel like this is maybe going to be one of those themes. Kind of mentioned it earlier, where you got to re-rack
Yeah.
the WIAC schools based on whatever happens that week. Could easily see Oshkosh getting in
Yep.
here.
Yep.
You know, Platteville was getting some votes kind of in the preseason. Maybe some of those other teams, Eau Claire or Oshkosh, maybe are getting a little bit more consideration here. Could see a scenario where a Stevens Point is kind of entering the mix into this conversation too. Going to be a very interesting WIAC season to follow, as it seems it always is. But yeah, definitely lacrosse looking very strong early. Any surprises, Matt, as you really maybe were thinking about what you might do and then actually sitting down to kind of put it together?
I think I maybe hinted at this earlier. My surprise was I think I thought I would run out of teams to rank and get to teams that I didn't feel comfortable with in my top 25. And that was just my perception as we sat at the Great Lakes Invitational and just were kind of watching the scoreboard of other games. But when I sat down to rank, I didn't always feel good about maybe how high I felt like I had to rank teams, but you got to rank, you got to fill in all the spots. That's one of the rules. You got to fill in all the spots. So, but I actually had more teams like, oh man, I kind of want to rank Wabash. Like, oh, I would like to maybe consider ranking Montclair State. I haven't ranked them yet, and I kind of would like to do that. Should WPI still be ranked? I actually took out Christopher Newport. They've lost a couple games, then played maybe some competitive games in their other ones that I didn't feel like should be competitive. You could still consider ranking them. So I think there's several teams in the end here. Like Oshkosh, like you already mentioned them. That's a team that I would like to kind of get in around the rankings. Claremont Mudd Scripps, I think that's a team that you could be ranking. So I was kind of surprised. I thought once I was looking at the teams and comparing them, I'd be like, oh, I only want like 20 teams in here right now. But no, I think it's more like 35 teams that you could kind of fit in there, and you wouldn't feel too bad about it.
Yeah, obviously you can only rank 25, but someone else has 25 spots they can rank. So it might not be a team that you have in, but there's probably a group of maybe 40 teams that someone else might put in, not a team that you necessarily have, but you can be like, yeah, I understand it. I feel like that's a rankable team, or you decided maybe to go with an Eau Claire, but someone else decides to go with an Oshkosh, or maybe you're going with a York and someone else goes with someone else. Like there's very much a mix. And I don't know what you feel like that number might be, but it could be, it may even be up to like 50 at this time of teams that are like understandably rankable. And while you only get 25, someone else could be making some other decisions. You can be like, yeah, I see that.
Yep, for sure.
All right, let's get into the picks, Matt. Last week, we had our third pick slate of the year. Take us through the results.
Yeah, our first game was a big number. Emerson were 17-point underdogs by our computer against Tufts. Tufts won that game 84-50, so Tufts actually covered that computer line, and I won that point. Whitworth were 6-point underdogs at Gustavus Adolphus. They won this outright by 2, and we both get that point. Trine and Marietta on a neutral court. This was a 3-point line, but as we talked about, Trine won that by a very large margin, and I get the point. Carthage were 1-point favorites against Mary Washington. Mary Washington won that game by double digits, and so we both missed the point. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week was one that we talked about, Chicago against Illinois Wesleyan. Chicago were actually 1.5-point road favorites, but Illinois Wesleyan win that game by 3. Zach, congratulations to you and the Titans. You get the point there. So that gives you a 2-3 week. You are 7-8 overall. I had a 3-2 week. That's a down week for me, Zach, and I was 11-4 overall. So I maintain a 4-point lead on you. So let's take a look at this week. Zach, the first game I'll have you pick first and I'll go after. It's NYU at Cal Lutheran. So it's an East Coast meets West Coast. This is a 2-point line in favor of the road team, in favor of NYU. How do you pick?
I'm going to go with Cal Lutheran. We just saw your ballot. You have NYU at 15. If I was a voter, I don't think that I would necessarily have NYU that high at this point. Give me Cal Lu.
All right, Zach. I know this is going to be a long way to travel, but as you said, I am voting NYU high, so I'm going to have to be a believer here. I'm going to say that they can cover that 2-point computer line and give me NYU minus the 2 points. Here is an old school Great Lakes regional matchup. Worcester against Mount Union. This is going to be at Mount Union, Zach, but it's an uncharacteristically high computer line. 13.5 points in favor of Mount Union. What does that make you want to pick?
Well, I'm going to go with Worcester here on the big number, but and you said it. Really, it's shocking to see that program be a 13.5 point underdog to anybody. Um, hey, at this point, maybe they deserve it, but that feels like a big number. So give me those points.
Yeah, this is just hard for me to see actually being larger than that computer line. That seems like it's big. It seems like it's too big, but maybe we just haven't adjusted to Worcester not being one of those national top teams right now, and they don't look like they are this season. So we'll have to see. But I think let's see if they can keep it within single digits, and we can both get the point there, Zach. Next one, Wyack versus CCIW. It's Wisconsin Stevens Point, 3-point favorites on the road at North Park.
Yeah, I would say that North Park is one that I had higher expectations for than what their results have been so far. Uh, Maybe that's clouding my judgment here. But getting 3 points, I'll take North Park.
Yeah, Zach, it's tough to. I guess this is going to be my second one, but it's tough to take kind of road favorite after road favorite and expect to be successful all the time in D3 basketball. But I'm going to go with UW Stevens Point, even laying the 3 points. I think North Park has played some games, even though they've won, that maybe have seemed maybe more competitive than they should be. So I think I still have some high expectations for the Pointers. So let's see if they can take care of business here at North Park. Here's kind of a fun one in the Northeast. St. Joseph, Connecticut, 1.5-point favorites. Here's another road favorite at Babson this week. Zach, your pick.
Gonna go with Babson. I just feel like there's always a lot of variability in what you end up getting out of Babson, but being a 1.5 point home dog, feels like a spot to really, lean into Babson.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting game. I think a really entertaining game and close game. But I like Babson right now a little bit more than St. Joseph, Connecticut. I think both those teams are in the mix for me of teams I still want to keep an eye on, even though I'm not ranking either of them. But Babson at home, I think this is definitely a winnable game. So if they're 1.5 point underdogs, I will take them all day on that line. And then another big one, kind of in the Northeast as well, our D3 Datacast game of the week, Tufts, 4-point favorites on the road at Keene State. So this is going to be a week full of road favorites. But here's Tufts -4 at Keene State. Zach, how do you see this game?
Yeah, kind of an interesting game of the week. You maybe think of it a little bit different than our typical game of the week, where it's like a matchup of top 10 teams or top 5 teams. I think this is just going to be a big matchup because both of these teams really kind of need this kind of win. You talked about kind of the uncertainty with Tufts. Keene State was that team that entered that or exited that big Virginia Wesleyan opening weekend tournament 0-2. It would be great news for Tufts to cover that 4-point line there on the road, but I will take the Owls.
Yeah. Keene State, I think you're right, has played a really tough schedule so far and taken up some losses. They don't always look terrible, but you got to get some wins at some point. Tufts also doesn't want to pick up their third loss and still kind of be a top 25 caliber team. But here I think this is going to be a competitive game, so I'm just going to take the 4 points and say I'm going to count it being competitive a game. I think, Keene State, from what we've seen this year, they could win this game outright, especially at home. And we know that atmosphere in big games like this can be like a really cool and intense atmosphere. So I think they're going to have a home crowd in their favor. I think they're going to at least keep this one close, if not win it outright. So I'm going to go with Keene State, and that's going to be our picks.
Let's go to the mailbag. Wrap this up with the mailbag, Matt. We got one here from Drew Latrenta who wants to know, how is the GLI in review? Any challenges? Have you seen any call reversals on stream or in person? Thoughts on challenge system in D3 so far? Of course, the quote on review, because one of the big changes in Division III basketball is the challenge system, the coaches' challenge system. We did see that come into play a few times at the Great Lakes Invitational this weekend. Matt, any kind of reactions to how we saw, the replay review system work, or
Yeah.
it seems to be, yeah.
I'm glad we have the technology, especially for when it comes tournament time and there's big plays. Hopefully we'll have the chance to get really big, impactful plays correct. I think for the most part, though, the call on the floor does stand. We only get so many views in Division III basketball And I think it's going to be tough for them to change too many calls, which is probably good. But I think I like the opportunity for, in a close competitive game, in an important game, that maybe we can fix something that's an obvious mistake. That being said, there was maybe a time or two when there was a game that was a double-digit margin with less than 30 seconds left, and a coach would call for a review of an out-of-bounds play. And like maybe we just don't need to stop the game for an extra 3 minutes to review some sort of that types of thing. But I think overall it's fine. We saw at least one or two reversals, but I think most of the time things were kept with the call on the floor, either because it was correct or just because it was hard to see anything different. And I think that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important to point out is I don't think Division III basketball fans should expect that a bunch is going to change now that we have review, because like you mentioned, limited number of camera angles. We even from our vantage point where we were sitting and be able to observe some of those conversations that you can't necessarily hear from the stands. There were times that a player might say, we challenge it, and the coach is just like, I'm not going to challenge that because they're not going to be able to see it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be, I don't think it's going to have an outsized impact. If it's something obvious, then that's great. And maybe it doesn't turn into a big thing, but having the opportunity to pick to make some changes to obvious calls is great. And like there's no downside to it, I guess, is the way I think of it. Like even if it doesn't give you a view that leads to a change, then you haven't really lost anything from before when there was no review. So I think that's fine. I think the other thing I definitely learned this weekend is that everyone is still, well, not from the officiating side, but kind of players and coaches, I think, are still kind of adjusting to what can I challenge, what can I challenge, when can I challenge. Okay, I won this challenge, so I have another challenge, right? So there's a little bit of a learning process, I think, for most people involved.
Yeah.
Okay, one more here, Matt, from Ron Berger. I think we maybe have already answered this one, Matt. You've seen them twice. Is Trinity, Texas, top 25 material? You certainly think so. You've got them in your ballot.
Yeah.
What are you putting the odds at for when the full poll comes out? Do you think Trinity's going to be ranked?
I do think they're going to be ranked. Yeah. From what I've seen, I think their resume is as good as anyone. I think it's legitimate if someone were to leave them out. I think they're probably seeing the 30-point loss to Chicago and saying, well, that's, it's a tough loss. Otherwise, the results are good. It's probably legitimate that someone could rank 25 other teams and have them just out. I think every voter is probably considering them. I do believe they will be just in, and I have them just in. You could probably consider them as high as, 14, 15, and as low as last couple out. But I think on the whole, on the average, we'll see them in that 19, 20, 21, 22 type of range maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely seems like a team that, yes, is rankable in that group of 40, 50, whatever it might be at this point. And obviously you've made the decision that, yes, you are
Yep.
going step beyond rankable and are ranking,
I
but
am ranking, yeah.
we'll see if enough voters agree. Yes. So to answer the question, yes, we think Trinity is top 25 material.
Yep.
Yes. All right, Matt, let's get out of here. A word of thanks. Our great trip to the Great Lakes Invitational is helped greatly by the people who support us on Patreon at patreon.com/D3Datacast. A couple shout outs to some new supporters this week, Matt. Mike McGrath and Gary Gelfman. Appreciate the support of them and everyone else along the way. You help us do what we do, and it's a lot of fun to do it.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to talk to Gary at the Great Lakes Invitational. He was watching the games there, so that was cool. But we just thank all of the Patreon supporters who have chosen to join us on this Division III basketball journey. If you'd like to join, go to patreon.com/D3Datacast. We have a $3 a month and a $5 a month tier if that strikes your fancy. We'd love to have you join us as well. But just thank you so much. We love talking about Division III basketball, and we love that there are people out there that enjoy hearing about Division III basketball. But I think, Zach, it's been a long weekend of basketball, a fun weekend of basketball. We got to get this episode out to the people. So for now, we're going to say, good job, team.